Welcome in, everybody. My name is Sam Long. I'm the Community Outreach Manager for Autism Tennessee. Thank you all for coming out this evening to our Parent Perspectives panel, graciously funded by the Humanities Tennessee grant. This is our last panel of the year. I cannot believe that it's been an entire year with this project. We're so sad to see it go, but the support from Humanities Tennessee has helped ensure that these education events have been available at no cost to the community and available for later distribution. So big thank you to them. Tonight's panel is about exploring life after an autism diagnosis, focusing on managing expectations and fostering a supportive environment for you and your child. Our panel of experienced parents, will share their personal narratives, practical tips, and insights. Before we dive in this evening, we want to remind you that, we're coming to each other from the comfort of our home, so feel free to do what you would do normally. You can stand up, fidget, doodle, move your body, step away, leave your camera on or off throughout the recording, throughout the event. We're all coming from the comfort of our home, so feel free to do what you would do normally, but just keep in mind that the session is being recorded. And I'm going to check the chat real quick. All right. Yes, and we do have another staff member from Autism Tennessee, Carissa, who is available in the chat if anyone needs assistance. So thank you for chiming in, Carissa. All right. So without further ado, we'll introduce you to our panelists this evening, most of which have served on our initial conversation regarding navigating diagnosis, which I think has been a bit over a year ago now. So thank you all for joining this follow-up conversation. First, we have Tanya Bowman. Tanya is the statewide family resource specialist for Family Voices of Tennessee. She has served in this role since 2007. Tanya is the mother of three, two young adults and one in high school, which provides her with lived experience of special health care needs and disabilities. Tanya loves working alongside other people who are passionate about serving children and families. She utilizes her voice to share the parent perspective across various councils, committees, and boards. Tanya and family live in Nashville. Welcome back, Tanya. Next, we have Janet Schaus. Janet works at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center in Nashville, Tennessee as the program coordinator for the IDD Toolkit at www.iddtoolkit.org, an online resource for healthcare clinicians to enhance their care of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She recently served as a hub team member for the Vanderbilt WellPoint IDD ECHO, adult healthcare training for clinicians, serving as a family navigator and resource consultant. She was part of the Tennessee Works Project, which was aimed at improving the employment landscape for people with disabilities, and wrote a popular blog, Rise to Work, for 8 years. Janet has been active in the disability community since 1998 and has worked on numerous legislative efforts to improve services for Tennesseans with autism and other developmental disabilities. She's the parent of 3 young adults, including a son on the autism spectrum. Welcome, Janet. And next we have John Schaus. John and his wife Janet live in Franklin, Tennessee, and have been married for 42 years. They are the proud parents of 3 children, daughter Emma and 29-year-old twin boys, Brendan and Evan, who are on the autism spectrum. Professionally, John is vice president of Engineering Link Systems, Inc., an industrial safety and automation company. John has been an outspoken disability advocate since Evan's diagnosis, and over the last nearly 3 decades has served in countless roles with multiple organizations, including both Autism Tennessee and the ARC, as past president, as well as the boards of the Autism Society of America, the ARC of the U.S. He was chair of Community Advisory Council of the UCEDD at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and serves on the External Advisory Board for the IDDRC at Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. John is currently on the National Board of the Special Fathers Network. Welcome, John. And we're also joined by Corey Moore this evening. Corey is a husband and father of 2 teenagers, 16 and 14. As an autistic, dyslexic parent with ADHD, he brings lived experiences to conversations about family life and neurodiversity. He's the VP of Technology at Ingram Barge Company and holds an executive MBA from Vanderbilt and a Bachelor of Science in Telecommunications with a minor in Computer Science from the University of Kentucky. He enjoys playing guitar, tinkering with anything that can be tinkered with, and spending time with his family. Welcome, Corey. All right, and I'm checking the chat just one more time to see if we have anything coming up. All righty. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you to everybody for being here. And we'll dive right on into our questions. So, panelists, you're welcome to answer or not answer any of these that you feel comfortable with. I'll call on each of you to reply. If you don't wish to reply, you are welcome to say pass. With our first question, it's more about early days, just kind of giving a revamp from the previous conversation. Um, so with early understanding, we were wanting to know what were the first days or months after diagnosis like for you? What were you experiencing? What helped you move from, um, if there was confusion or grief or whatever, what helped you move towards understanding? Was there anything that surprised you? There can be a whole spectrum of emotions, as we've learned from these past panels. So just wanting to know what those early first days or months were like from you. John, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Evan was diagnosed at about age 2.5, somewhere in there. So we had a little bit of time in early intervention with him before he turned 3, and we, transitioned into school and whatnot. But the early days for us, like I think for a lot of families, were confusing, just trying to find our way into this world of disability. We're old. In 1998, there weren't a lot of websites to go to find good quality information about autism. I think at the time that Evan was diagnosed, the incidence rate was like 1 in 2,500, 1 in 2,000. So, gosh, how things have changed since then. Um, but we tried to hit the ground running with finding out as much quality information as we could. Believe it or not, one of the ways that we could get good information about autism was through the website of the Autism Society of America with what they called a uh, fax back service, where you could dial in, punch in a code, and they would fax you a 3 or 4 page monograph about various aspects of autism, things like speech therapy or behavioral interventions, etc. And that was one of the best ways to get good quality information. Evan was diagnosed by a psychologist in private practice because we couldn't get in to get a diagnosis at Vanderbilt through Triad at the time because of their long waiting list. Um, Her name was Dr. Frances Nearhouse. She's still in the area, I think, and not working in this arena, but I think she's at Vanderbilt now. But to her great credit, when she gave us the results of the various evaluations that Evan had gone in, she drew up close to us and said, "Have you considered that Evan might have autism?" Um, and we knew, we had already kind of come to that conclusion, but at the same time, there was a great sense of relief in having a professional use that word with us for the first time. And we really didn't know anything about autism. We'd seen the movie Rain Man, and we knew Evan wasn't a Rain Man. Um, but as I say, we pretty much hit the ground running. One of the things that Dr. Nearhouse told us that was hugely helpful was to say, you will draw more support and information from getting plugged in with the parent community. There's an organization here called the Autism Society of Middle Tennessee, now Autism Tennessee. And she said it's made up of families, and I would highly urge you to make connection with them. So I looked them up in the Yellow Pages, which is what we did back then. and saw that their office was over off of Craighead Street as part of the Tennessee Disability Coalition. It was close to my office, so I went over there and thought I'd sneak in and you know, see if they had some brochures or things that we could read. And there was a woman in the office there that day. Her name is Laura Lloyd. Laura was the first executive director of the Autism Society of Middle Tennessee. And she introduced herself to me, and we ended up visiting for about an hour and a half or 2 hours that afternoon. And I was very glad to see that the organization put on a bi-monthly orientation for families who are new to the diagnosis. And we attended the very first one of those that was available to us. And they put on monthly workshops. And we started going to those monthly workshops, which covered a wide variety of topics. And we um, we would go to those workshops, which were held at the Bill Wilkerson Center on the Vanderbilt campus. And we started seeing that the same young families were coming to a lot of those same workshops. And we met a bunch of those folks. And what would happen is we would have the workshop for an hour or whatever with a Q&A period, and then we'd all stand around talking for 45 minutes about our kids. And some of those families that we met in those early days are still some of the people that we love, that we know, that we're close to. Tammy Weiss and her daughter Morgan, and folks that some of you who are very involved in the autism community may still know some of those names. And we just drew a lot of comfort from connecting with those families. We definitely did go through grieving each in our own way. For Janet, I think, and I won't speak too much for her, but I think a lot of what she was going through was kind of that sense of panic that we had to do everything all at once. That, we've got this window of a couple of years or a few years, that Evan, whatever progress Evan was going to make in the short term, we had to be right on top of everything, both medical, educational, etc. Um, I got involved with the organization and ASMT, Autism Tennessee, and my grieving process was a little different than hers. And I think that caused some stresses in our marriage just because we were at different places in that. But I will say that we always had kind of a divide and conquer mentality that she would bite off one area to try to learn as much as she could, and I'd bite off a different one. And so we, took a team approach to it, but it changed, as anybody on the call who has a child with autism, I think, will agree. It changed our family dynamic so much. Um, and I know some of the questions later have to do with how those perceptions of who Evan was and what he was going to be able to do, what he was going to be challenged by, how those things morphed over the years. So I'll save that for answers to later questions, but that's just a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of the earliest days of how we got involved in the community.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And maybe Janet, if you'd like to chime in now, we're in a very fortunate position to have, a couple who's been through a lot of different things and a lot of different phases of life together. So Janet, if you'd like to chime in, please do.
Well, I won't add too much, but I will reiterate the value of the parent community. Getting connected with other families was so huge. Um, and it is overwhelming because there are things you need to know medically, there are things you need to know about education services and how to navigate and how to help your other children, come to realize that their sibling is different and his needs are going to be different. And as John said, it changes the dynamic. And the fact that we had twins, one of whom is on the spectrum, one of whom is not, really, I think, complicated our lives in ways that maybe other families don't necessarily see. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you for that, Janet. Tanya, would you like to take a whack at the question?
So for Jasmine, Jasmine was a 24-weeker. So coming into it, there had been a whole lot of things that turned the world upside down with her early birth and spending months in the NICU, and everything was delayed. Then we got a hearing loss diagnosis. And so the autism diagnosis came in elementary school. And one of the things, though, coming out of the NICU, where Jasmine's survival was not a given, one of the neonatologists said that if Jasmine survives, this won't be the end of the journey. There could be things later on. And so that was there, but it was like a pause because there were still things in the immediate time. So when the autism diagnosis came and things happened, I don't know, it was kind of like maybe kind of numb at first. I'd just been going and doing all the stuff anyway. And so trying to gather information. I was already working at Family Voices, so leaning into my team, Autism Tennessee is in the building. So just trying to gather as much information as I could. And I had my older son at the time, so him going in. But then it was different when my youngest was diagnosed, because I had like some experience from Jasmine's journey, presented differently, but I knew something was going on. And just the approach about it, I think it was like Jasmine was diagnosed with developmental medicine, so was Jacob eventually, but the premise was his wasn't so seen, one of those kind of like, well, he doesn't seem that way, even from the school psychologist at his school. So, but I knew, and his teacher knew, which I really loved her in preschool, and she knew earlier diagnosis than Jasmine, different, but just really thinking at that time, like, I know what I'm talking about, and really wanting to pursue so he could have the support he needed to be successful. But that definitely different than how Jasmine's came about with, but yeah, just in hers, just kind of gathering information like, oh, I've been doing these other things, so now I'm going to have to add this to it, and just hoping I could do well by her to learn as much as I could and get connected and making sure I was doing all I could to support her, both of them at each time. So
Thank you, Tanya. Definitely hearing the similarities and, the struggle to balance it and needing to find resources for several things quickly and living in that panic and uncertainty, especially at first. All right. Corey, would you like to answer?
As far as the early understanding, yeah, nothing much more than what has already been stated. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Not a problem. Thank you. The next couple of questions kind of have things in common, so maybe we can combine them here. But it's about kind of reframing or undoing old narratives. So we're talking about this experience of, maybe some overwhelm, unexpectedness, just living in uncertainty. in early diagnosis. What was a moment where your understanding of what diagnosis meant began to shift? Parents have shared like they needed to reframe things and how they thought about diagnosis, or just what life was going to look like moving forward, so that success could be individually defined. Is there a resource or conversation or realization that helped that switch for you? Um, and Tanya, if you'd like to start us off.
I think adding, at that time, Jasmine was immersed in the deaf, hard of hearing world. So that's kind of, that was kind of how you're kind of focused. I mean, the medical stuff was there too, but just reframing, and I guess building on my understanding, trying to educate family, because how they would see things that would, if behaviors happen or whatever, or friends that hadn't been exposed, trying to, them seeing it. And I mean, she's still Jasmine, and I guess learning too, and then feeling like, um, maybe even teachers at the time, because just thinking, this is, um, a young girl that's hard of hearing, with some extreme, early birth, but then now we have this thing to go along with it that not linear, just kind of, that own path. So, um, just reframing and really keeping in mind, if I was doing this and whatever was going on with Jasmine, that I just had to let that guide me, that I kind of knew, even if they didn't agree with whatever, um, that I always had to do what was best for her, and whatever stereotypes people had about it or whatever, I just try to plug along. And Jasmine's pretty much her own force and has been. So she kind of helps kind of plug her way in with that too. So, and then Jacob really, that, oh, he doesn't look like it, he doesn't act like it. Basing, I guess, kind of that, even like I said, that was family, maybe friends too, in those circles, which you would, not knowing and comparing the two. And it's like, well, it's a spectrum, it's different. Everybody doesn't do everything the same. They're their own people. And really trying to set that tone of it, and just keeping that kind of in the focus of like, yeah, you watch the TV movie and you think, or you're gonna tell me how, or what your cousin did or something like that. And that was like, yeah, I'm okay, but this is my kids, and I'm learning, and I know other parents, and I'm doing work on my own, and I feel like we have a good pediatrician. So kind of pushing back against the additional things that were kind of trying to be pressed on them, like, well, you can't have this because you're not just sitting somewhere and doing whatever. Or, well, even with Jasmine, even down to, she's hard of hearing, she's not totally deaf, and people are like, oh, well, she can hear, she doesn't need hearing aids. So kind of fighting back against a lot of those just things ongoing. But just, and like I said, having Jasmine be who she is, I said she taught me well, and letting her kind of guide and be her person, and me trying to do and fight back against those narratives coming from, I think, outside forces that probably maybe were not quite as supportive as they could have been in the beginning for us.
Thank you for that, Tanya. All right. And Corey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think with those two questions, when we first started down our journey, a lot of focus on parents, having to be quick to get services, get the diagnosis, get the services, get it fixed as much as possible. And a very narrow understanding of what it was to be autistic. So, one of the first things that I read that started to expand that, I know it's I think it's still a little controversial with the book, but neural tribes was something that just kind of like helped help give me the concept of what the spectrum was and how that looked. And then I think a lot of content on YouTube and TikTok, you have to be careful, but starting to hear voices of autistic people and what their experiences are like, even for the adults, give you a much better insight into what's going on. So I leaned heavily on that stuff. I actually got a diagnosis for myself through that journey. But understanding the cadence, understanding the different things that are on the spectrum so that you can deal with them individually, gives you better access to care, better ways of dealing with things, understanding. And I think, finding out that autistic people aren't distant or, lack empathy. It's actually experiencing things it's so much bigger than what others do that causes the cognitive or the disconnection and stuff. And we all deal with it, right? Like we use sunglasses. Like we go outside, we put sunglasses on, you get a headache. It's hard to function, so having that understanding's really made a big difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corey. And I'm glad that you're mentioning YouTube videos and books that might have helped with that, because that lends well to our next question about more of these tangible supports. Like, what were those YouTube rabbit holes? What were the books you were reading or community groups you were involved in? So we'll get to that question in just a bit. Janet, would you like to answer next?
One of the things that I found really interesting was, and I can't remember the person's name, but I want to say it's like Archie or Ernie and his autism color wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being a linear, Evan's here on this end of the spectrum because he doesn't communicate. He has a lot of sensory issues. He has self-injurious behavior and aggression. And our friend over here who has a PhD in physics and, who runs an organization. But the color wheel has it so kind of a scatter plot. You can have really good skills here in one place and really poor skills over here in this place. And I think that really changed my view, because there are a lot of things about Evan that really make him stand out. I can't tell you how many times we had a teacher or a speech therapist or an occupational therapist say, I've worked with several kids with autism, or I've known a lot of kids with autism, but Evan's nothing like any of this. It was like, well, yeah, because he's got really good receptive language. He pays a lot of attention to what's going on around him, but you get almost nothing back. You don't know how much he knows. He can't tell you what he's thinking or feeling. But and I'll see if I can find that while we're talking and drop it into the chat. But that was really interesting to me. And unlike Corey, who used YouTubers and TikTokers, John and I got exposed to adults on the spectrum through our work with disability organizations. John went through Partners in Policymaking, and we were involved with Autism Tennessee and with the ARC. So we got exposure and got to know adults on the spectrum and learned from them. I am too old for TikTok. Watch a few YouTubers, mostly read stuff written by adults, but it was really that, I think, that color wheel that changed my view of how I looked at the spectrum.
Nice.
Wonderful. And John, would you like to add to that?
Sure.
Of course he would.
I'll mention three things. I'm a kind of a quoteaholic. I love quotes. Isaac Newton said, "If I've seen further than others, it's because I was standing on the shoulders of giants." And I think about our journey, and I think about some of the people that we met early on, and I really feel like we had great benefit from standing on the shoulders of giants. And people like Laura Lloyd, people like Holly Lou Conant Reese, who lived here for many years and was the just an unbelievable advocate. We were able to get plugged in with people who taught us to look at disability as just a part of the human condition. Whether it's 1 in 6, like some statistics say, or more than that, people will have a disability or an acquired disability in their lifetime. Um, it's just a natural part of the human condition. And Janet mentioned I went through Partners. One of the speakers that was really influential to me was a woman named Kathy Snow, who started the original People First movement. And I still have a button that I wear that says, when you see, meet, or think about a person with disability, presume competence. And I think that I know one of the questions later has to do with expectations, but that thing of presuming competence will never steer you wrong, because when people with disabilities, autism included, and maybe especially, are truly supported and nurtured in the right way, they will surprise you every single time, with how competent they can be, even the folks who are most challenged, folks like Evan. So being surrounded by people that really helped us just think about disability in a different way was huge. The other thing is books. As you can tell from the background here, I'm kind of a voracious reader. And when Evan was diagnosed, I started reading everything I could find. And some of the books were great, some of the books were not so great. But you'll figure out, and I encourage folks, particularly folks who are new to this journey, whether it's people who are diagnosed later in life, or whether it's people who get the diagnosis as a child, for their child. There's a lot of good books out there now. I'll mention two in particular that were huge in my journey. One was by a woman who is a professor of special education out of Chicago, Dr. Paula Cluth, who wrote a book called "You're Gonna Love This Kid." And I absolutely cannot recommend that book highly enough for people, particularly with school age kids or kids who are just entering the school system, to read that book about a way to think about their children and their what their school journey is going to be like. And just real briefly, the story behind the book is that when she was a young special education teacher, her very first assignment, she showed up at the school and had this big couple of file boxes of cases of the students that she was going to have, and she was reading about all of them, and she got to the second file box, and it was like all these files: Jacob, 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 Jacob. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've got a ton of kids named Jacob." And she started reading these files, and it's like, you know, he acts out, he hits, he bites, and you know, just all of this negative stuff. And she thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. How am I going to teach this kid? And she went out and she was walking around in the school building, and she met the administrator who had hired her, and he's like, "Are you getting settled in?" And she said, "Yeah, I've been reading all the files on these kids, and I've, you know, got this one kid, Jacob, that I'm a little concerned about." And he's like, "Oh, you're gonna love this kid. Jacob is amazing. He knows everything there is to know about ceiling fans. He knows everything there is to know about vacuum cleaners. He's a fascinating young kid, and you are gonna love him." And she's like, "No, I'm talking about the Jacob that acts out. I'm talking about the evil Jacob." And he's like, "No, no, it's the same one. You're gonna love him." And she said, you know, in that moment, it was like, it's what you're looking for. It's what you choose to see. And that was a huge lesson for me. It's a fabulous book. The other book that I highly recommend, and it's not about autism, but it's by a gentleman named Robert Hudson. It's called Skylar's Monster. He has a daughter with a very rare genetic condition that presents somewhat like autism, um, but just his and his wife at the time, they're divorced now, but um, the journey that they went through with Skylar's diagnosis and hitting the ground running and having those high expectations and learning to see what an amazing child she was and not choosing to focus on deficits. That was huge. And then the third thing, like Janet mentioned, um, just getting to meet adults on the spectrum. Um, you know, at the very first national conference that I went to, I met a woman named Julie Donnelly, who is a professor of special education at the University of Missouri at the time. She's retired now. And her son, Jean Paul, was one of those. And I have to say, we didn't get this message, but I know a lot of families who were diagnosed before us or around the time that Evan was diagnosed who had a doctor or a professional tell them, your child will never succeed in school. They won't be able to graduate. They'll never go to college. They're they're going to have a challenged quality of life. You know, that was not uncommon to hear people that got that kind of a message. And Julie got that for her son, Jean Paul, and she just refused to believe it because she knew him and knew what she could see in him and insisted and became a fierce, fierce advocate in the schools for his education. And Jean Paul today has three master's degrees, one in library sciences and two in history, including Renaissance studies. And he works for the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's married, he has two kids, and she just refused to take those low expectations and what the professionals had said and said, no, we're gonna dig in and we're gonna do what we can. Not every story has a happy ending like that. But I stand by what I say that every child that is properly supported and nurtured will surprise you every time with how capable they are and they can be. And I know dozens, literally dozens of adults on the autism spectrum now, maybe hundreds, some of whom I consider some of my very closest friends in the world. And they are remarkable people. They are just remarkable people who it's a pleasure to be around.
Thank you for that, John. I love it. There are some people chiming in the comments with
Hmm.
what you shared. So that's resonating for people. Thank you for sharing that. And Janet, it looks like you found the color wheel. Thank you so much for posting that in the chat as well. Are there any other resources like that or other communities? We've mentioned a few, such as Early Days Autism Tennessee and other community groups. Any other that come to mind? Or if you're still, we're always finding resources. What do you wish existed for parents that doesn't?
Well, I'm going to say this. I wish every family who got a diagnosis got a family navigator to walk alongside them,
Yeah.
to help figure out, school stuff, medical stuff, social stuff. We expect an inordinate amount of stuff from parents who are getting a diagnosis, who are learning. There's this whole thing that they've got to dive into and figure out how to navigate. And oftentimes it then immediately becomes a battle at school. And you're told you have all these rights, but then when you go into the school system and try to exercise those rights, you get a lot of pushback. And here you are new, just learning about how this diagnosis is affecting your child. Yes, they're the same child, but suddenly you now have a name for why they're not talking, or why they're lining up their toys, why they don't interact with other kids like your other children do, and trying to figure out how to best integrate them into the school, how to get them the right therapies, all that sort of stuff. And so my big hope would be at some point, and that you don't have to be in a waiver. You don't have to be, granted great insurance to get this family navigator. It comes when you get the diagnosis. And I know that's pie in the sky, but I think that would be so helpful if families had somebody to help them go in and advocate at the school, help them go in and advocate with a doctor who may or may not be well trained in what issues that a child with autism or an adult with autism has. So,
Janet, what's the name of the PTI organization here?
STEP, it's
STEP
supported.
support. Yeah, are they still active?
They are, but I don't think they often send IEP advocates in. I think that's a fairly rare thing.
Okay.
Tanya may know more.
No, they really don't go in much at all like they did previously.
Okay. STEP is support and training for exceptional parents. And when Evan was diagnosed, they were doing a regular workshop about parent rights to teach you about IDEA and what rights you have in the school system. And that was a really good workshop to go to. And I hope they're still doing something like that.
I think a lot of it is online. So
Okay.
like you watch a YouTube video. And the thing is, as much as I love the fact that we can do Zoom and people can sit in their homes, the thing that you miss with this is that thing that John mentioned, standing out in the parking lot for 45 minutes after the meeting, getting to know each other, getting to connect outside the actual meeting. And the same with those in-person STEP trainings. You still got an opportunity afterwards to talk to families, learn about their experience. But the family navigator would actually walk alongside you for a while, sort of like when you're student driving and you've got the other person there with access to a set of pedals and a wheel. So that if you start to go off into the ditch, they can keep you from going into the ditch. Um, I think that would be super, super valuable, but it's, like I said, it's pie in the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. Tanya, any other tools, supports, or communities you found most helpful early on or now, or more pie in the sky ideas of what could be nice to have or nice to create further down the line?
I really like Janet's idea of a family navigator. I will say it was a family, I want to say they were either in Wyoming or Idaho. And so when you get calls when families are thinking of moving here, and they had something similar in one of those states, and I may have the state wrong, but they had moved, but they still had somebody assigned to them. So that was from another state though. But kind of following and kind of asking what's going on, and they were going to make the calls. They were going to do a whole bunch of things, and I thought that was great. And they were like, "Do you have something like that here?" And I was like, "Well, no," but it was that they kind of were going to stay in touch with them and kind of help them get acclimated, even though they had moved from that state. I think that would be so many things to navigate. It would be nice. That would be a great thing to have a family navigator.
Absolutely. Corey, any other thoughts you'd like to share?
Autism Tennessee has been the majority of our, not to plug, but to plug, So that's been the biggest resource of community and stuff for us. There, I did attend a conference at Vanderbilt last weekend for startups, neurodivergent and startups and stuff. And I'd like to talk at some point about some of the stuff that we're seeing that's coming out, but I think it kind of helps with some of the stuff. I don't think anything replaces community, but knowledge resources. There's some really cool stuff that's coming down. So I'll share that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. All right. And then I think moving into our next set of questions here, we're gonna get at what I think John's been chomping at the bit for, is expectations and just redefining what success looks like, what even normal means. That can be a very limiting word for families, especially when there's, expectations, whether self-imposed or from external sources that are prohibiting that sense of success as a unit and individually with a child, whatever that looks like. So I think we'll talk about how you began to redefine what success looks like as a family or for your child looks like, and how you moved maybe towards a more affirming mindset, excuse me. And John, would you like to start us?
Oh gosh. Yeah, this is a big topic. Redefining success.
Well, can I
I'm
jump in and say one thing?
sure.
A lot of families get pushback from their parents, grandma and grandpa. Oh, he's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, or, you know, something dire. Oh, this is awful. Our family is destroyed. How are we going to survive? We did not get a lot of that. They, um, John's parents a little bit were more like, well, he might grow out of it.
Or
But
he's
but
he's doing better, isn't he? He's doing better. I
but
think he really
they
is
were
doing better.
they were supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And when we would go, John has a big family, and when we would go up at Thanksgiving or Christmas, they tried to be super accommodating. And my parents, because I'm the only one with grandkids, they jumped in and helped tremendously. So I just wanted to say I was grateful that we did not have those external pressures on us in trying to navigate how to make our family work together successfully. Now you can talk, John.
Uh, I was just going to say I'm a huge believer in person-centered planning. I've been fortunate to be part of a number of sessions around that. There are a lot of tools you can use for planning. One that used to be used quite a bit here in Middle Tennessee because we had a number of trained facilitators was called PATH, Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope, PATH. And basically it's a facilitated discussion with the person uh, that has autism or the disability, participating family members, anybody who would be in their support network who cares about them, to talk about, to the degree that the person with the disability is able to talk about it, to talk about what does their future look like. And the one thing that a lot of these models for person-centered planning have in common is you start out by thinking about what does the long term look like at a distance out in the future that it's really hard to imagine and say, you know, the sky's the limit. What's the North Star? What would their ideal life look like? And then you come back and say, okay, well, where are we right now? And what supports are in place? What challenges are there? How do we begin to move forward? And then say at some distance out in the middle distance, like 4 years or whatever, what are we working towards? And and sort of building that. In the case of path, it's literally building a path to the future. Um, I went to a conference that a gentleman named James Emmett put on, and he said, you know, you can start with just like drawing a tic-tac-toe board, and across the top right, 2, 4, 10, and down the side column right, live, work, play. In 2 years, where are they going to live? Where are they going to work? And well, for a student, you know, school is work, if you will, and then play. What does play look like for them? What are they doing to add subjective quality of life in the short term, 2 years? And then what about 4 years? And then what about 10 years? And as I said, there's all kinds of models that you can do this planning. We did it with Evan, and how many people did we have around the table with him?
Probably 10 or 12.
At least we had current teachers, former teachers that were invested in him that we still, you know, that we respected, professionals from Vanderbilt, people from our church, friends that we knew that we were really close with in church who really had nothing to do with disability, but yet knew Evan. Our financial guy who has a child with a disability, he was there in the meeting and actually hosted it at his office. And we did this path for Evan. And one of the first questions was, where do we think Evan will live in 10 years? And of course, I'm like, well, he's going to live with us. And the facilitator, Sharon Bodor from the Ark Williamson County, said, no, Dad, it's not a question for you. Where does Evan want to live? And we communicate with him often with a grease board and give him choices on the grease board, and he'll read the question and make a choice by circling it. And the question was, where do you want to live in the future? Do you want to live with mom and dad or on your own? And he circled on my own. And we're like, oh gosh. And that was the moment where we started thinking about what would that look like? How do we make that happen? Where would that even be? And fortunately, today, Evan lives in an apartment, just a one-bedroom apartment on his own, but with 24/7 support through the Medicaid waiver. We were very fortunate to be added to the waiver back when we had a period where we were really in a crisis situation, and we can talk about that if it's appropriate. But I credit that episode of doing that person-centered planning for us to really start to think about what is it that adds quality of life for Evan, and how do we make those things real? We know he loves to go swimming. So how do we make the opportunity for him to go swimming year round? Well, we have him a membership at the rec center that has an indoor pool. Um, at the time he was doing saddle up, but the day was coming pretty soon when he was going to age out. Is there a program where he can continue to do horseback riding after his time at Saddle Up? So we started thinking about those things that add quality of life, and trying to make those a reality. So I can't speak highly enough for families sitting around, whether informally or in a formal process like PATH, to try to do that planning, to think about where are we right now? Where do we want to be in the short term? And what do we want it to look like on down the road? And how do we get there?
Thank you, John. And Janet, I know you chimed in a little bit earlier. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I'll let somebody else talk.
Sure, not a problem. Tanya, would you like to answer next?
Yeah, I think, like I said, as Jasmine's kind of always had like definite plans. Turns out Jacob does too, about what they want to do and who they are. So kind of Jasmine ended up talking about wanting to go to college. I want to go to college. And I'm like, okay, and how does that gonna look? And she was consistent. And you know, we got to that point of her getting in next steps, but very determined, very vocal about things that listening to things that she did and didn't want to do, and will be told that very often if she doesn't like something, that's not what she wants to do. And skills that she is great working with small kids and hearing other people say that, and her wanting to make a career out of that. um and just seeing, watching her learn to advocate for herself in big and small ways, um, has just been huge. So really with her going alongside, and then also balancing out how Jacob wants maybe a little bit quieter, not so quiet at home though, but in general just seeming more quiet, but kind of branching out now that he's a junior in high school, seeing him kind of vocalize like before, oh, I'm not interested in going to college, I'm going to do this, but now having these plans that he researched, that he wants to go to Norway, somewhere that has better for the environment, some of the country. And so really studying that and really being able to share that and being excited um and just learning all the things, but really taking my cues from them, and really hopefully leaning into, you know, what they share with others, what everybody else brings to the table that's in our extended circle, and really just kind of being there to encourage and support, and um, hopefully add a little bit to what they want to do, but try to listen, even if I get in the way, trying to move myself out of the way and really hear. And um, I don't think John was going to let me do anything else but kind of watch, like I'm going here and you come along for the ride. So really being mindful of that and watching them grow as people and just seeing how that manifests. And it's really exciting to see them moving toward their best life.
Thank you for that, Tanya. I'm hearing so much, and what everyone's saying about like being a builder, a teammate, and helping to build your child's autonomy, and that's really great to hear. Corey, anything to add here?
Not much, just that it's wild to, like, when you go through the journey, like things shrank so quickly in the very beginning. You think you're just going to be supporting and protecting, and the further we go along, you know we're having to keep up now. We're expanding, is trying to expand as quickly as they are, and finding out that they're a lot more along than what we expected. So a good problem.
Thank you for that. All right. And I think in answering this question, some of y'all have maybe shared what could be a moment of pride or joy or connection. But can you share a moment like that that you've shared with your child that you might not have imagined before diagnosis? We've talked a lot about, undoing previous expectations or um, um, others' expectations that you've taken on for yourself and your child. And what's a moment of pride, joy, or connection with your child that resonated or surprised you? And Corey, would you like to start us off on this one?
This is recent and this is being recorded, so I'm curious to see how my wife takes this. But we dealt a lot with social anxieties and sound sensitivity and things like that. And a couple months ago, was asked to take my kids to Lorna Shore concert. So we did floor tickets, and a lot of visual effects, extremely loud. So we stayed for the whole thing.
Cool.
Love that. Tanya, would you like to go next?
I think two things, current and a past thing that kind of informed when I just kind of knew that Jasmine had this. Her bus was coming late in school, and she was getting there past her time, and she doesn't like, she didn't like it. And so Jasmine skipped the middleman. She was like, I'm talking to the executive principal. And so it's like, why go to the middleman? And so one of her meetings, other teachers are like, we cannot get an audience with the executive principal. Jasmine has gone in and said, I don't want my bus to be late. And her bus wasn't late. It was like she got picked up and she made it, but I mean, she wouldn't get it for herself. It wasn't anything that she talked to me about. She did it. And I mean, then everybody like, we never get to have a meeting. And like Jasmine's had, a meeting. And so from then probably she met with him maybe from here on out. So it was like that moment, like, she's got this, she's gonna do. But and also I guess recently just being able to say I need a break from school, and just what can I do to support that, and just with being brave, knowing that school is still the dream, but just being able to say right now I need a break, I need to do some things to take care of myself, and can you help me do that, Mom? And that's just pride, and when it's not okay, being able to say it's not okay and asking for help. And that's made me really proud to walk alongside her. And so.
Thank you for sharing that. Janet, would you like to go next?
Well, this is going to sound odd, but because Evan will be 30, in a week?
Mhm.
But because he doesn't really communicate, our way of communicating, so to speak, our enjoyment of him, he will go in and lie on his bed in his apartment, and his dad and I will take turns going in and lying down with him. And oftentimes for me, it's kissing on his forehead, playing in his beard, tickling him. And when he smiles, his whole face lights up. There is joy in his eyes, and there have been periods recently where there's not been much joy in his face. not a lot of smiles, not a lot of giggles. And we have made some changes, and we are beginning to see once again those smiles, that inner glow. And it is so sweet and so rewarding for me. I think his dad plays on his phone with him on John's phone. Evan doesn't have a phone. Uh, but I just lay there, and when you talk about lying and snuggling with your 29-year-old son who is 6 feet tall and weighs 230 pounds, if you don't explain a little more, that sounds kind of strange. But anyway, that's where I find joy right now. So.
Well, you took my answer. I was going to say the same thing. The idea of cuddling with a 30-year-old guy is probably not something that I would have expected back, 28 years ago when we first got the diagnosis. But it's a moment of connection, and it's just so incredibly sweet. As Janet said, when he smiles, it just lights up the room. And we do sometimes play on my phone. Got a game on there that we take turns, and he's really good at it. It's a geometry game where you've got to place different shapes, and he's just extraordinarily insightful and good at it, and it's fun. And one of the things that I think all have as parents of kids who are challenged is when we see those little milestones that they meet that may not be a big thing for a quote unquote typical child, whatever that is. Um, but we realize what a big deal it is when we see our child has mastered that. One of the things that I've noticed fairly recently with Evan is now if we're over at his apartment, he wants a drink. He goes, it's snack time. He'll go to the refrigerator, get the pitcher out, get a glass out, pour himself a glass of juice and drink it, and then put the empty glass in the sink if he finishes it, or if he doesn't finish it, he'll put it back in the fridge with the pitcher. Those are big deals. I mean, that's something that he didn't do a few years ago. And, these are all just little sorts of things, but, just to share that with him and say, dude, I saw that you got the pitcher out and you poured a glass for yourself. That's amazing, and you can tell that he feels a sense of pride in stuff like that.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you to everybody for being here and again, spending your evening with us. We're about on our last question. If you're someone watching from home who has a question for one of the panelists, definitely feel free to pop that in the chat. But I think we'll close out the night. And I know, Corey, you had mentioned wanting to talk about that workshop, so I don't know if here's an appropriate time. But we're just wrapping up any closing comments. If you want, or there is a final question, if you could speak to a parent just receiving the diagnosis, what perspective, tool, or mindset would you want them to hold on to, especially leaving this conversation today? And Corey, would you like to start off this time?
Yeah, I think I could just share just quickly what I was hearing at the conference. There's a lot of things that are coming or being proposed in Nashville for resources and stuff, but a lot of the information was coming from AI driven tool sets and stuff, and it's a buzzword, but things that were kind of clunky or unrealistic in like video game trainings for learning communication skills and stuff like that is getting a lot smoother, a lot more realistic, and it looks a lot more promising. Also, there are a lot of tool sets to help with having a lot of doctors and services, and trying to keep that information together, trying to keep a calendar, making sure that you are focusing on the right things, and bringing all that information together, and then also providing information on top of that, a lot of tool sets that are coming out quickly to help parents kind of or individuals, manage their own care. And a lot of advocacy tools, understanding the laws, being able to ask questions into these machines instead of having to research information back out. And then the cool thing was a lot of the neurodivergent people there were using personal AIs for, they would say everything from adulting to affirmations. So, they would interact with these things and it would help keep their calendars, help make sure that they do the things they need to do, tell them to stand up or, get their exercise in for the day, help them communicate. But then also they're like, they can come in and say like, I'm feeling stressed out, I'm feeling frustrated. And, what can I do to help improve this and stuff, and get good tips and tricks plus affirmations and stuff like that from a technology that has more of a personal understanding for them. And what I'm most excited about is that the expense of these things is minimal. And that's what I'm looking to put together, is some ways to make sure that it protects your privacy, but using, free or near free tools on a phone or a computer that, can help you out now. So that was it was interesting, and I was very excited about it. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Corey. It's great when technology can can do some of the lift for us. Thank you for sharing that. Tanya, would you like to go next?
I think I would just, kind of share what I've shared throughout, like, just loving your child, getting connected to other parents. And I think, because it is a spectrum, and in my, working, you sometimes see parents compare, and it's like, don't compare. Your child's journey is your child's journey, and, gather the things that will best support them and not do some sort of comparison. That's what I-
Thank you, Tanya. And John?
A lot of us were given this little book when we first started called Welcome to Holland. And it's, if you haven't seen it, it's a very thin, little easy read of a book that talks about you'd planned a trip to France and you were really looking forward to seeing the Eiffel Tower and going to the Arc de Triomphe and walking along the Seine and all of those things that you would do if you were going to Paris, visiting wine country out in the French countryside. And when the plane lands, you realize that you're in Holland. It wasn't the trip you planned. And the allegory is, having a child with a disability. It's not what you expected. It wasn't what you planned for, but you've landed in this strange new world. And it takes a while before you realize that Holland's pretty wonderful too, with the tulips and the dikes and the windmills, and you can have a good trip, a legitimately good trip. Well, I always thought that little book was a little stilted. It seemed dated even when we got it back a gazillion years ago, and I know people that have gotten it even fairly recently. As you mentioned in my introduction, I'm part of the Special Fathers Network, which is a national organization supporting dads of kids with disabilities, and I do two support group
Zoom
meetings.
calls.
Yeah, Zoom calls. Although one of every week for dads of kids with disabilities. One of them is all local dads here in Middle Tennessee, and one of them is with dads from around the country. And we read books and discuss the books. And the book that we're currently reading is called Seeing Ability, or I don't know if you can see over here very faintly, it says seeing disability. And I think this is an incredible resource that could and should take the place of that Welcome to Holland book. It's thin, it's 100 pages, but it is such a well-written little uh, little book with chapters that are right straight to the point and cover a wide range of things that you have to think about right out of the chute when you have a child with a disability. Uh, Acceptance, navigating the world of medicine, put on your own oxygen mask first. It takes a village, dealing with others, impact on family, setting a high bar, advocating for your child's education, the road less traveled, don't stop believing. Those are some of the chapters in here. The chapters are about 5 or 6 pages, and I just think it's extraordinarily well written. So I can't recommend it highly enough for folks who are really, really new to the journey and just trying to figure out what does it mean that I have a child with a disability. Um, I would like, I'd like to see, I know the Welcome to Holland book, somebody got a gazillion copies of it through a grant. I'd like to see somebody write a grant and buy a gazillion copies of this so you guys could put it in your welcome packet and hand it out to families with a new diagnosis.
All right, and Janet.
Well, when John brought up Welcome to Holland, I thought he was going to talk about the autism version that came out about, about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, welcome to Iraq, or because the person was talking about their child was self-injurious and aggressive, and their house was destroyed. You know, instead of looking at the tulips and the windmills, you were looking at dropping bombs and, you know, flying debris. And I kind of waffled somewhere between the two. It wasn't Holland for us, but it wasn't Fallujah either. Um, but I guess one of the things, and I don't think this would happen in this group at all, but I do hear parents talking about their children being damaged, being, you know, hurt, wishing they could remove their autism, saying out loud in front of the child, I hate autism. And that just cuts me to the heart, because that is so much a part. I mean, yes, I would love, love, love for Evan to be able to communicate with us. That has been, in my mind, job one since he got his diagnosis. But even in the days of Cure Autism Now and Defeat Autism Now and all that, it was never about, quote unquote, removing his autism. It was about trying to make him, or allow him, with whatever interventions we could find, to be the best Evan he could be. And as I said, my hope would be he at some point could, in some fashion, communicate with us his wants and needs and illnesses and pain. But I got to the point that I have accepted. We may never get that, no matter what we do. And John said that window of opportunity. I was so determined that, you know, we had to do all we could in that window of opportunity. And that window is his lifetime. It's not by age 5. It's not by age 12. It's his lifetime. And one of the things I do want to mention, yes, Autism Tennessee has some great groups to connect with, but some folks I work with at the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. They have what they call a Vanderbilt community group run, I believe, by Dave Caudell, who is the associate director at the Frist Center. And they take the view that the Vanderbilt community is basically anybody in Middle Tennessee. So if you want to join, that's a way to meet other young adults on the spectrum. And I think it's a pretty cool group. I'm not qualified to join. But Dave's a super advocate, and he is not only an individual on the spectrum himself, but he has 3 children on the spectrum who show up very differently. He's got one that he refers to as a mini me. He said she and I are like peas in a pod. But his other 2 kids, he's like, Janet, I'm kind of like you are with Evan, with my other 2, in not always knowing what they're going to do or what they're going to say or how they're going to react. But those would be, I think, the things. And as Tanya said, love them. Oh, John wants to have the last word.
No, not the last word, just a word. You've touched on it, and we haven't specifically said that, but it's the great paradox that we face as parents of kids with disabilities. It's the great conundrum of our lives that as parents who love our kids unconditionally, there is nothing that we would not do to ease their way in this world, to help ease their challenges and help them have whatever quality of life they can have. There's nothing I wouldn't do for Evan. And yet, at the same time, I do not want to fundamentally change who he is, because who he is pretty damn wonderful. And I love him just the way he is. So I think whatever that paradox means for you in your own lives, that's something that all of us have to deal with. We want to help our kids, but we don't want to change them. And that's kind of a mystical thing.
Thank you, John. That might have been our last comment of the evening. Anybody else have any closing comments? All righty. Well, thank you again to our panelists, Tanya, Corey, Janet, and John. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody in Zoom land. Thank you so much for being here. If you find yourself in need of resources that have been discussed tonight, we'll be sending out an email with the various books, groups, etc., that have been mentioned here. If you need additional support, you're welcome to contact Autism Tennessee's resource helpline that I have dropped in the chat a little bit earlier, but we'll go ahead and resend it. But it is support@autismtennessee.org. You're welcome to reach out regarding groups, programming, or other resources in general in the Middle Tennessee area, anything from accommodating hairstylists to, who can help navigate state benefits. So
Somebody just asked in the chat, is there a Spectrum Moms group? And I think there are actually several.
with Autism Tennessee, not specifically, but I have heard of other, Spectrum Moms groups in the area as well. Mm-hmm.
There's one out here in Williamson County called Margarita Moms. I don't know how often they meet, but I think they have a rollicking good time.
I was going to say, the reality is, unless things have changed dramatically, it is often the moms who show up at support groups. And the need for a Spectrum Dads group was to give them, for lack of a better term, a safe space to talk about guy stuff and their feelings.
Guys don't have feelings. Come on. We're trying to be better dads, better spouses, and better men.
And sometimes they feel more supported when it's just all guys and not guys and girls, men and women, moms and dads all together. So But yeah, there's Margarita Moms. There's also the Franklin Autism Moms.
Right.
So there may be others, but those, since we live in Williamson County, those are the ones we're familiar with. So. Well, thank y'all for listening to us.
Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and say goodbye for now then, but thank you again to panelists and everybody who attended this evening. Appreciate y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.